we can be in this place where we're so blinded by our own pain that we are not in consent, and we're saying things that are mean and really creating a toxic experience, when what we're actually wanting to communicate is like, I'm hurt.
Right. Men are living in this experience of feeling emotionally unsafe with their feminine partners often. And so this idea of, I need to manipulate you in some form or fashion, emotionally, financially, somewhere along the way, when you trip past when you start to get into manipulation, that's where it starts to darken.
There's these parts of us that get stuck. We have a trauma at a certain point developmentally, and then we get stuck in that place. And so sometimes when we get triggered, that trauma gets activated, as you know, and then all of a sudden we're in our, 30-year-old, 40-year-old, 50-year-old, whatever body, with that voice and that look, but it's a 5-year-old that is like screaming out.
Welcome to the Embodied Relationship Experience podcast. My name is John Wineland. I'm your host. Today, I am so pleased to be with two of my dear friends and sisters, Jamie Elizabeth Thompson and Jess Magic. And we are going to dive into this topic, which is a supercharged topic about what distinguishes the dark masculine from the wounded masculine, what distinguishes the dark feminine from the wounded feminine, and really talking about the framework that has been laid out about the difference between a masculine and a feminine that we all have, and men and women, and all of the things that have been swirling around since Me Too, right? And what we've seen, we're going to really try to unpack what we've seen in terms of how people use or weaponize or misuse or abuse each other with these terms, and what exactly is happening out there in this struggle, right? Like this struggle that we're seeing for men and women to find healing with each other. So I want to start, before we jump in, before I bring Jamie and Jess in, I want to start with just a little recap of, my framework for looking at this. And some of it I borrow from one of my teachers, David Data, and it's the framework of a first, second, and third stage kind of relating. And in the first stage of relating, we're really in our own, we're self-centered. We're really thinking about what we need, what we want, which can be extremely healthy, what we desire, which can be a very healthy use of what David Data would call the first stage. Then there's the unhealthy expression of the first stage, which is really about you're not giving me what I want, right? So we go from this place of recognizing what we need and want to this place of making this leap of why aren't you giving me this? And that becomes sort of an unhealthy use of the first stage expression. In the second stage, we're really in this kind of healing shared modality of what's best for the relationship, or what's best for the community, or what's best for the world. It's a we-centered approach to relating. And then in the third stage, as David describes it, we're really thinking about the divine. We're expressing for the divine. What does love want? What does art want? What does some kind of higher expression of consciousness and love want to experience in this moment? And it may be, in the third stage, it may be different than what I want. What love wants might be different than my preference or what I need, might be different than what you want or need. Love might have a whole different idea for us. Does that make sense to you guys? Yeah. I mean, I think y'all have heard it a few times here, but I think that's a nice framework. And one of the distinctions I want to start with is this idea of what's the difference between the wounded masculine, the wounded feminine, and then the dark masculine and the dark feminine, right? Because we're seeing aspects of both play out all over social media, I'm sure in the work that you guys do with women and with men, you're seeing it play out. In relationships, we're seeing it play out. And so I think it's important for us to, at this day and age of social media public shaming, I think I would call it, right? And social media calling people out, for us to really identify what is the appropriate way for us to work with wounds, and what is a way for us to really watch ourselves, because we all have darkness, right? And what are the both positive and negative aspects of darkness? What are the positive and negative aspects of wound, right? And really start to flesh this out, because I think that people are stuck. I feel that people are stuck in relationship and trying to figure out how to heal. I mean, I think that's what I see a lot of. I see people very interested in the high level practices, ceremonial practices, sexual polarity practices, tantric practices, but where they get stuck is how do we actually heal each other, right? So I'd love to hear, I'd love to hear from both of you, like what you see as the primary wound, right? With women in particular. And in this episode, we'll really try to distinguish, I'll try to get into a little bit about what I see the difference between the masculine and feminine within a man and the masculine and feminine within a woman, because I think that's really helpful distinctions for people to have. But I'd love to hear from you guys about what you see as the sort of primary wounds that women are facing, and how they're dealing with it, both in what you would consider a healthy way and how they're dealing with it in what you would consider an unhealthy way.
I think what I see a lot of in my work with women is a wound around it. There's a pendulum swing, and on one end it can be where a woman is feeling like she's not getting her needs met, and so then she becomes very demanding and starts kind of emotionally dumping on her partner because she doesn't know how to actually hold her pain, how to feel her pain, how to move through it. And on the other side, she could become more of a doormat and go into more of like the fawning kind of trauma response and allow for things to happen that actually are not right for her. So on one end, there's a lot of demand, and on one end, there's a lot of doormat. And in the middle, there's this integrated place where I think you're pointing to, where there's a capacity that we build to be able to sit with and be in our own pain, our wounding, our needs, our desires, our boundaries, and hold that as an integrated adult, and then ask for consent with a partner before we project emotional experience on them, and understanding the difference between sharing something vulnerably and allowing your needs to be seen, expressing a boundary, and doing all of that from this place of compassion, both for self and other, while also having consent with your masculine counterpart or any other human being for that matter.
Right. And I think this is a really interesting idea of like how at what point, because we're all wounded, we're all dealing with some wound or another. But at what point is the expression our wound? At what point does it cross a line? At what point does, hey, I'm sharing my wound with you? Because oftentimes we'll find these like, the way it shows up in my work is needs conversations, right? Whereas where a need conversation can be both something that's very clear, and a needs conversation can also be a subtle complaint. Right. But I'm curious, at what point does the sharing of a wound or a vulnerability start to cross a line into becoming damaging? How would you guys distinguish that?
I'd love to just add another layer into what Jamie shared that might also come back to what you're talking about. But the first things that came to me were survival and safety.
Right.
And I feel like they might even be underneath what our needs are. They're definitely connected to it. I think that there is in my work with women, I see a very like consistent pattern or wound that's underneath manipulation and certain ways of manipulating how we get our needs met.
Right.
That is rooted in a lack of safety or a lack or a fear of survival. And I think that those are anthropological and biological and historical and cultural. And so there's so many different layers to that. And so a part of that work really also has to be around, is my safety actually dependent on you?
Right.
Or can I raise myself in such a way where I am circulating that energy of healthy? Jamie and I talk a lot about the healthy adult. Like, can I find the way to regulate my nervous system? Can I find the way to track when I'm dysregulated? Can I find a way when I'm leaving my body to either make sure you're okay and manage your experience, or going into a place of collapse? And all of those things are about safety, and they're about either reinforcing that I'm not safe or reinforcing that I am safe. And then underneath, another aspect of what I feel can be emotional manipulation or psychological manipulation that can come from the feminine is a deep fear of survival. Like, am I going to be okay? And there's so many different dynamics whether that's like your actual, you're financially dependent on a partner or something like that, or you have children and you're like, how am I going to do this without a partner to help me? And so I'll just sacrifice this, or, it's like, but that survival, I think, it expresses itself, I believe, through men and women in different ways.
Yeah.
But it's really big for both of us.
Yeah.
So I feel like safety and survival are something that we all need to take a look at where we're at with that.
Yeah. In a way, it's almost like throwing out the masculine and feminine terminology is very helpful for this conversation.
Yeah.
And yet, there are some distinctions that I think are important to highlight, because this healthy adult, we've been talking about this, on our thread, what it means to be a healthy adult. And I think the thing that I'd love to double click, at least from the feminine perspective, is once it goes from I'm wounded, or I'm having an experience, or I'm having feelings, to manipulation, right? Because the thing I see, and that I've experienced, that I've certainly been guilty of, is not recognizing how manipulative I am in order to feel safe. In order to, men are still dealing with this, emotional safety. You're talking about actual physical safety and safety of being able to, pay the bills or take care of the children. Men are living in this experience of feeling emotionally unsafe with their feminine partners often. And so this idea of, I need to manipulate you in some form or fashion, emotionally, financially, in whatever way, that's when I think we start to, like, kind of, if we're going to go look at a spectrum between, sort of healthy expression of wounds and dark masculine or dark feminine, right? Somewhere along the way, when you trip past when you start to get into manipulation, that's where it starts to darken. Would you guys agree? And how do you guys see that in women in particular these days?
Yeah, I think that there's when driven by the deep need for safety or survival or love. I mean, it can even get into like this need to be loved. Like, it can really be centered in the heart. But women can drop into this place where that wounding runs through their actions, and their actions are no longer coming from a choice. There's like an internal part that starts driving the bus per se. Like, if we're looking at this,
we black out.
We black out through the lens of internal family systems or parts work. It's like there's some part that is not our integrated higher self, adult self, that is driving our bus of parts. At some point, another part that needs survival, safety, love comes and starts driving. And when that happens, there's really a loss. Like, I look at it like we become intoxicated. We're no longer in our sober self. There's a younger part that starts driving. And I know from my personal experience and from just seeing this in so many women, working with so many women, it's like there's almost like a blackout. And then there's a part that comes in and it's like a pain body.
Yeah.
It's the, this greater sort of life form that is out for blood, and it wants to confirm its brokenness, and it continues to feed on suffering. And so if it were to actually let love in that moment, that part would start to heal, and like pain body would kind of disappear. But that part that really just wants to hurt
Yeah.
because it feels hurt,
Yeah.
or like make it change. Like there's a tremendous amount of force. And
Yeah.
I mean, what it feels like is it's those moments, and we all know what it's like as a human being, where we're just flooded and our nervous system is no longer we're no longer able to hold it. And so there's a desperation
Yeah.
that comes from that place that we can have a lot of compassion for. And it, when we're moving from that place, it can be emotionally violating for the man.
Yeah.
Because we can be in this place where we're so blinded by our own pain that we are not in consent, and we're saying things that are mean and really creating a toxic experience, when what we're actually wanting to communicate is like, I'm hurt.
Right.
I really want you to love me.
Right.
Like, I feel lost. I feel desperate. I feel afraid.
Or
And
you hurt me, which is a very, happens often, right? Like intended and unintended ways. And so just to be able to communicate like, wow, you're really hurting me right now, or you really hurt me then, right? I think the thing, as you were speaking, what came to me was that it's so clear, the masculine violation, right? It's physical abuse is the manifestation of, I am so hurt and my nervous system is so lit up that I need to impose hurt on you physically.
But I think there's also psychological and emotional that can come from the masculine.
Of course. I'm just pointing to the clearest expression of what I would consider going from being in a wounded state as a man, right, to now I'm literally wanting to hurt you physically because you've hurt me so bad and my nervous system can't control myself, right? I'm curious how you see that show up in women. Like, is it just like what you said, where it's just they start to sort of emotionally tear men down, or publicly? I mean, we see a lot of public shaming, right? Is that the way that you guys see it happening? Or is there? I'm sure there's more nuance to it than that.
Yeah, there's two things. The first, before I even say that, I feel like, adding to Jamie's point, there's also a real piece about developmental stuckness. And this is what we're talking about with healthy adult. Like, there's these parts of us that get stuck. We have a trauma at a certain point developmentally, and then we get stuck in that place. And so sometimes when we get triggered, that trauma gets activated, as you know, and then all of a sudden we're in our, 30-year-old, 40-year-old, 50-year-old, whatever body, with that voice and that look, but it's a 5-year-old that is like screaming out. And we're not trained, we're not trained across, like, I feel like this stuff should be taught in school, like middle school, high school, as soon as people start to get into a certain place where they can developmentally start to assimilate this. Because to be able to, one of the most life-changing things, it's a body of work that both Jamie and I have trained in, was when I started learning how to track regression and starting to see in someone's face, like, oh, this is not adult man John. This is not my like partner or my friend who's like fully here. They're sliding back to a former version of themselves, and that is the one that's got the microphone right now.
Yeah.
And how do I stop relating to them 100% as the man that I fell in love with and in his highest self, because he's not there right now. And same thing with, with women, with humans. And there's a way in that moment to be able to track that, even just by asking, like, how old do you feel right now? And there's a way, it's like, even a simple question like that, somebody can be like, wow, I actually feel like I'm 12 years old and I'm in the backseat of my parents' car and it's driving and I have no control, and it's like, when we can, what that does is it slows down momentum. Because I think, going back to your question, a lot of times where the hurt comes from, like the verbal, emotional, psychological, is when there's a velocity and the pain body, as Jamie was saying, is like picked up, and that is just running. And as it can like amplify itself, right?
Yeah.
And then we're like, we're not even realizing it, but we're like amplifying each other in that space. If somebody doesn't have the wherewithal to be like, wait, what's actually happening right here?
Right.
Where are you? Who are you right now? And what part of you is running the show right now? And like, is that part of, what does that part need? And so I think that sometimes, in my work with both men and women, it's like, but definitely with women, it's like, Oh, that's a like a 6-year-old girl actually right now. And she's trying to just know that she's loved.
Yeah.
And she's playing out all these things that, and the adult version just doesn't even know, is not even really conscious of that happening.
Yeah.
But then once we have opportunity in a healthy way to start to train that and track that, I think we allow a witness consciousness, that higher self that Jamie's speaking to actually be recognized and stabilized, so that we can take these moments of like, hold on, just give me 1 second. It's like, I've done this myself where I'm like, hold on, I feel that velocity picking up. I feel myself wanting to make you wrong or whatever that is. And then I'm like, okay, how do I lift up into a different octave of my capacity right now to just take a peek right now, so I can at the very least let you know that like this part of me is very young and really just actually needs to be heard and held. But like when you can take a moment to actually, even for a moment, unwind, to just let the other person know what is happening, it can create so much more space for that, like, you know, going back to your question about that, like kind of like unconscious dump, it's all about you, like just that alone can take enough of a pause to make that a lot more available.
Yeah. It seems like we're really talking about nervous system capacity and awareness, right? I mean, having the nervous system capacity to take some breath, to really understand, oh, I'm getting my shit is really up, and I'm gonna hurt you. I just wonder why so many people, I mean, even conscious community, right? Like so many people struggle with this, right? So many people struggle with this. The way I see it in men is that it shows up even in non-pain body moments. It shows up as manipulation, oftentimes financial manipulation, domineering, emotional domineering, reactivity, right? I see it show up a lot, even in the non-conflict moments of how am I constantly angling to when I see it in what I would consider the dark masculine, it's about controlling you. I mean, I think maybe it's the same for both men and women here, right? But it's really about controlling you so that I feel safe.
Yeah.
You know, it's about controlling you so that you'll give me what I want. And having the awareness to sort of recognize that, I think, is really crucial. And I'm wondering why you think why is that so tricky? Like, why is this the thing that just keeps coming up again and again and again and stopping people from really healing, enjoying each other?
I think on a larger scale, the practice of systemic control and manipulation of humans has been what we've been indoctrinated into.
Yeah.
Starting with religion and even the way government is set up. I mean, it's like we live inside of a paradigm that is about dominating for the safety of the people.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that kind of indoctrination that happens, and growing up inside of patriarchy, if that's what we want to call it, where that has been the primary form of how to be with the feminine. Like the feminine is uncontained and powerful and has so much energy, and that's terrifying. So we better dominate and contain and keep it small and disconnect women from their true power and aliveness, because the systems might not be able to function in exactly the way they currently do if they didn't do that. So I feel like we are born, it's like there's like a legacy burden in IFS speak of like that we are born into of the domination and control and oppression.
Yeah.
And then you see something like, feminism and the Me Too movement. And while there's a lot of benefits and importance of having equality in many ways, in civil rights and everything, there's also a backlash. There's also a balancing of the power that has happened in a way of like creating more, like women now want power over men. And so we're in this battle of who's going to have the power and who's going to have the control, rather than this place of third stage, as you're speaking of it, where we're in service and interconnected together and connected to the divine.
Yeah.
But it's like we're in this phase of like this power struggle.
Yeah.
And women are trying to get power in the ways that they know how, which is through these manipulative, seductive, controlling tactics. And men are trying to get power through the ways they know how of, dominating and also manipulating or stonewalling and interchanging women and men, because we all cross over and use all of the different tactics. But I think it's like, where are you taught, as Jess was saying earlier, where are we taught healthy relating?
Yeah.
Where are we we're growing up inside of this paradigm of control. So to step out of that requires someone to choose to do some kind of deep inner work and soul searching. And even to your point earlier, going into like higher vibration, tantric practice or breathwork practice or ceremonial practice, there's a lot of things that can feel really good and kind of lift us out of the internal grow up work. The meeting every part, the feeling all the pain and getting through that and learning how to communicate with our partner. Like that's the not as sexy practices. And I work with a lot of women that come and they're like, I want like sensual embodiment. And I'm like, let's talk about holding your nervous system. There's a step that we just aren't even taught to look for, and then media sells us this solution of like, if you just buy this product and if you just do this thing and if you look this way and you act this way, then everything will be better. And everything is an avoidance of really actually doing this deeper inner work that makes everything possible.
The way you said that about we missed a step, and we're still missing a step, right? I think now with this conversation, and I think a lot of these conversations are starting to happen, especially in my world, in the polarity world, where people are like, yes, I know how to, be an invitation and be in my feminine, so to speak, and channel energy, but I don't know how to like keep my nervous system regulated, in those moments. And I think I'm wondering if this is how you guys see it. We're coming out of the domination of the patriarchy, which goes back to the Romans and the Aztecs. Didn't just start with the church. This has been sort of human conditioning for a long time, even in Egypt, like, so we have used, power has been misused, and now we're coming out of this period where women, not only feminism, but then Me Too, where women are like, okay, yes, now we're going to exert power over this abuse that we've experienced for 100,000 years, being property basically, and being burned and being all the things that women have had to endure. But we're using power as we know, which includes again, I see so much of this public shaming that's going on. That is a power play, right? And that's where, women they actually have power to take a microphone with 100,000 followers and start to call people out, right? Call men out for being narcissist or being whatever. And I see this as the pendulum maybe swinging a little bit too far. We've talked about this. I'm wanting power because you guys have had the power for the whole, the whole, pretty much all of human history. And now we're wanting the power and we're going to use it it's almost the same ethos as men used it. It's a power play. It's just using slightly different tools. As the collective feminine, how do you see that? And how do you see that playing out?
I have a lot of trust in the process, to be honest. I have a lot of trust. I think that, if we look at a grief cycle, I have kind of my own version of the grief cycle, but it's like there's denial and then there's either grief or rage in some order. It's like
some combination
once we realize the thing, it's like there's grief and then there's the rage of the injustice, or there's rage and then there's the grief that it happened. And there's this phase of acceptance, like, wow, that happened. And then there's a phase of forgiveness. Like once we've accepted, like, okay, the event happened, the thing happened, the cultural thousands of years happened, whatever that is. Then there's this then there's this forgiveness of like, wow, okay, like here we are, and I'm going to open. That's like the heart is starting to open. And then there's the compassion from the forgiveness is like, wow, I understand why that happened. I understand why this abuse happened. I understand why why these people were so afraid of the Shakti or the feminine power or that wild like wisdom or that connection to spirit that is a very natural element that sometimes shows up more naturally in the feminine aspects of ourselves. And that's so powerful. That is so powerful. And then what I've seen, because my history is I used to run a nonprofit that was all dedicated to healing the root causes of sexual trauma. So I spent 7 years deep, specifically in one of the darkest aspects of humanity, which is sexual trauma, incest, abuse, and like in the healing field around both working with male and female survivors and looking at the cultural context of it all. And that's where this kind of frame for the grief process came. The final phase of that is actually gratitude, where there's like this, wow, even though that was so hard, it had to happen this way for some reason. And now I can feel grateful even for the injustice. And that's a very high level to achieve, but it's possible. And so I have this trust that with everything that happened with all of back during the pandemic, all the race riots and with Me Too movement. And I see these movements that are like, those are kind of US focused that I'm speaking to, but with these movements that have happened that feel like they're just like unearthing something that is so deep and has been so prevalent that it needs to go through. It's like coming out of that collective denial and coming into it needs to rage and it needs to grieve. And that doesn't always look pretty and it's not always fair. It's not always proportionate to whoever is representing that.
Yes,
and I think that's a really challenging thing for like, whether it's like this race or a person from this race that's holding this or this man that's holding this for this woman because she's on the tip of the arrow of thousands of years of that she's like recognizing, but she's not necessarily parsing out and being like, hey, I realize this is a disproportionate amount of rage and injustice that I'm pointing into right now. Like the highest
But just that would change the experience for men so much. That level of awareness, like, hey, I'm not just screaming at you, I'm screaming at my father, my brothers, and all the men who've, abused me or neglected me,
like,
right?
Can you be the tip of the arrow for my tip of the arrow, recognizing that this is not all about you at all, but you're representing something and I need to, that is so healing. That is like, I feel emotional about like that healing. And so I feel like if we can somehow on a collective level start to be a stand for that level of healing, I actually believe that we can get through this whole like Me Too is just it's like the white head that is like pussing out of like a deeper systemic toxicity that is like, it's not pleasant. Nobody wants a whitehead on their face, but it's the collective whitehead of that aspect. And we're like, we need to like let that pus out and then start to do the deeper cleanse. And I think that there's like what your work is, what our work is, and what so many of our peers and beloveds are doing right now is I feel like a huge offering is to start to create those healing fields. So it's like we can really detoxify, because then I think our nervous system will be like, whoa, I feel flushed out. Now I can hold space for this at a personal and collective level.
Yeah, I mean, I see that in my workshops where the moment there's a practice where there's consent and men know like, hey, you're holding the no. You're holding her no. I mean, I'll put a man in front of a woman and for 5 minutes, she's just saying every no that she never got to say, or she's saying no for every woman that never got to say no. The men love it. Like inevitably, if I go, men, can you take more? They'll be like, yeah. But it's that because it's set up in a container and it's very clear what you're talking about, men actually really do have capacity to hold that. Where there's the issue that comes up is when it's unconscious. I am unconsciously, you are my father right now, and you are the other men, and you are the men of history that have abused women. And that part, I think men are just, most men don't have the nervous system capacity. And even men that do have the nervous system capacity, we've talked about this, it doesn't feel good to just have all of your unconscious wounds dumped on me with no recognition that they're your unconscious wounds. Some of it might have to do with what I said, maybe 10, 20%. I fucked up. I said the wrong thing. I did the wrong thing. I looked at the waitress, and I did the thing. But now I'm taking the brunt for this whole other thing. And I think that's where men are struggling. And I also see it, I've seen it in my personal relationships, and I see it in couples that I coach, that there's this sort of unconscious demand or expectation. It's sort of like a covert contract of like, I just get to dump whatever, however, and you're going to hold it for me. And men are being, and this is part of, the kind of unforeseen consequences of David Deda's work. Men think like, oh, I have to hold everything that she's giving me with equanimity because that's what David Deda says a conscious man is supposed to do. And men are going, wait a minute, that's not quite right. That's not quite. So I think what we're bumping into is, how do we bring consciousness and nervous system regulation into those moments so that we can see that it's not just you I'm mad at because you looked at the waitress's ass, there's so much more in this urgent expression that needs to happen. How would you work with women on that?
Well, I actually want to offer something to men here in this moment.
Yeah.
Because if there is an unconscious rage dump coming your way that you don't wish to receive.
And you didn't get the beware unconscious rage dump coming your way.
Exactly.
Hello, unconscious rage.
We should
rage
brand
dump.
signs like that and send them out.
Yeah, if you're not available for that, it's okay. And I want to invite men to develop the capacity to hold their boundary in relation to that.
Yeah.
And that maybe women have gotten this, get out of jail free card because they're like, oh my God, there's so much collective oppressed rage in the feminine that like now we just get to do this.
Yeah.
Like we just get to do this whenever we want, and every man has to hold space for us to do that. And I've seen that. Like I've seen that consciousness, and that's just where a lot of women are at. Or they enter polarity work and they haven't done inner child healing.
Yeah.
And this is often where it's like this happens, right?
Very true.
And in that place, a man can actually hold his boundary in relation to the feminine.
Yeah.
And it's a term that I got from Sue Johnson in a therapeutic training like 15 years ago. It's called catching the bullet.
Yeah.
I feel that that's a capacity that humans can develop so that when someone is bringing them energy that they're not actually available, resource to receive and present for in that moment, that's not healing.
Yeah.
I believe that healing is when there's an interconnected experience that's happening.
Yeah.
And if it's just one-sided and she feels better and he feels terrible, that wasn't actually collective healing. That was something that like the poison just transferred.
Yeah.
And I see this a lot in relationships where the poison will transfer from one to the other and one will feel better and the other won't feel better. And it's like, okay, something wasn't actually really coming from a deeper sense of love or held and available in a way where there's like consent present. So I want to invite that in men.
It's so important, Jamie. I mean, it's so important because because men actually this, and again, this is the byproduct of years of, sort of David Deda's work. And I don't think David intended this. Partly I think he did. What David was trying to say, just to kind of take David off the hook here a little bit, David was trying to say, get wide enough and connected to consciousness enough so that you are the witness of the experience happening in front of you and you are not the experience. That is the essence of masculine practice. I am the witness of my emotions, your emotions, our fighting, whatever's happening. I'm the witness of that. I'm so the witness of that there is nothing for you to hook into. I think theoretically, that is a fucking beautiful practice that I strive for, that a lot of men strive for. But we are also human and we also have sensitivity and hearts. And I think that you saying like, hey guys, you actually have permission to go, just my nervous system's not capable of holding you the way I know you want to be held right now.
Yeah.
And hearing the things you're hearing, I'm not available for that. Just giving them permission. And then also on the other side, like letting women know it's okay if men do that.
Yeah.
I've literally tried to do that a few times and been told, no, you need to sit down and listen to my dump, start to finish, then you can speak and blah, 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 blah. And I think that both men and women need to learn, like, no, that is not healthy relating.
That's the cycle of abuse. That's
Yeah.
a woman who has been deeply hurt that is then, I'm going to do the thing that happened to me to somehow,
Yeah.
make that right.
Yeah. And
Ultimately,
of course, men are doing this too, right?
Yes.
Like, it's not just women. Men are emotionally dumping, being overly reactive. I I see a
Totally.
lot of men doing this too. Yeah.
that is true.
Yes. I'm
It's
sure you guys have both
It is
experienced that.
all happening in every direction.
Yes.
I think that ultimately, in a healthier dynamic, when a man draws his boundaries, like, I'm just not available for this right now. Like, I see you. I want this for you. I want you to have this release, but I'm just not available for this right now. Ultimately, that should engender trust. That should engender, and should, is obviously a tricky word,
Yeah.
but like, I know
That should be celebrated.
Jamie has been an amazing teacher for me personally, as somebody that has leaned on the side of less boundaries, more available for everything that anyone wants to bring in every moment, because I have a lot of capacity and I can take it and I can like be the witness and but then it's like, whoa,
Yeah.
but Jamie's reflected me specifically around, just healthy boundaries for my own self.
Yeah.
And then, ultimately what happens when we have those good boundaries is we start to establish more trust in ourselves and more trust in each other.
Yeah.
And so I've specifically seen situations where men who typically do have the capacity to hold that have told their women when they're in a good relationship,
Yeah.
hey, I'm so stretched right now. I can't hold this right now. Like, I need to take care of myself. And like, if you can be held by one of your girlfriends or and it's like, wow, there's actually something, and this goes back in some way to David Deda's work around, I think one of the best things that came out of his work was, at least in my life, has been around the testing, like the feminine is going to test you.
Yeah.
Once I read that, I started tracking it in myself and interrupting it when I was doing it.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I was just testing you.
Yeah.
I was doing that. And in the middle of it, I'll pattern interrupt myself, call it out. And then my male partners have been like, thank you so much.
Yeah. We would love
We
to hear that. Yes.
So
yes.
to the women,
yeah.
it's like, I do think, while I think there's been things that have been misinterpreted and not everything is so like black and white in David Deda's work, there's some really, really instrumental
nuance.
pieces.
Yeah.
And I think that one is one that I would say for the feminine to be able to track when that is happening. It's like, are you really here for me? Are you going to leave me? Are you going to, and that goes back to the survival.
Can you take this part of me? Can you take this part of me?
Is this okay? Are you going to love me even if I?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that the testing piece, I think that, again, like so much of David's work, it's been misinterpreted to, yes, I'm going to test you, and that's like my right.
Yeah.
That's my right.
Exactly.
And that is where I think what's happening is we're waking up from that and we're going, wait a minute, this is all really beautiful in the realms of polarity and sexual energy and, just masculine, feminine differences, celebrating differences. But the human aspect of, hey, I'm aware that I'm testing you, which men do too, but women are just so much better at it. It's like you can figure out the one chink. I could hold 99 things and you're going to find the one thing that I just don't have the capacity to hold, and you're going to push that button until I collapse. And, so I think what we're up against is this, it's almost unconsciously adversarial thing that's happening. And that you're the first woman who I've ever heard say like, hey, I'm testing you and I'm aware I'm testing you. And I just want you to know I'm testing you. I mean, maybe there's been another woman that said that, but we don't hear that very often.
Yeah.
And I think that would be so, to recognize how much it takes to actually hold all of you is something that I feel is missed a lot. Like it's really an expectation. It's not something that's given lots of gratitude. And that's where I think things go dark, right? When there's that expectation that you're supposed to do this, that you're supposed to do that. That's where I think the darkness starts to creep in. Okay, so we'll start with the premise that everybody's wounded in some form or fashion, right? And what we're trying to discern here in this conversation is, what are the light ways to work with our wounds, which I think you guys have really, highlighted. And then what are the dark ways that we work with our wounds? And how can we start to bring awareness to the ways that are a bit darker? And when I say dark, I just mean unhealthy, painful, hurtful, destructive. And then what are the, how do we move it back over here where we can now start to really work with our wounds in ways that are healing and what I would even call sacred, right? And so I'll make that distinction really quick. When I'm working with a wound in a way that opens your heart, right? I'm in a sacred expression of that wound. Like if I'm sharing my wound with you in a way where your heart actually softens and melts a bit, right? That I believe is a sacred expression of wound. When I'm expressing my wound in a way that closes your heart, or even worse, in a way that damages your heart, then I'm obviously in an unhealthy, painful, abusive expression of that wound. So those are the distinctions that I like to make, but I'd really just like to keep, just because I think people really need to hear, how have your masculine partners over the years expressed things both in ways that are, that have opened your heart, made you want to move toward them, made you want to have compassion for them, made you want to love on them, and how have they expressed their wounds to you in ways that have done the opposite?
So I think a place I could enter this from is the conversation of masculine and feminine, I feel can sometimes be conflated with the conversation of the inner child and the adult. If there's, and this is where I really appreciate the training that Jess referred to earlier that has me be able to track how old I feel a partner or a person is, or just be able to track if it feels like there's a regression or something that's happening here that's like teenage protector part, or like a 4-year-old child.
I have one of those. Yeah.
Right? And to be able to track that has been really supportive. But there has been times where I have had a partner be in, a young child place and expressing something, and then that is like really an opening of my heart, and I feel connected and like, oh wow, there's like a healing that's available here.
Can I ask how he did that, just so men listening can get a sense of like what that looked like?
Yeah, I mean it looks like, I mean, we have a practice of asking for consent. We have a practice of like I'm having an experience, can I share it with you? And I think that's such an important part to just buy in of like where we're at in that moment. And then he allowed it to be seen. Like there's like tears, there's feelings, there's a sharing in a way that is holding the child. Or not holding the child. Like there's kind of there's two different ways that work.
He's prepared your nervous system.
He's prepared my nervous system. And sometimes it's his adult self is holding his child and he's sharing it with me. And sometimes there's actually like, it's just the child. Like we're actually just so deep inside of a wound cycle right now. And we're right here in it. And there's a clarity of how we can connect with this part. And in that moment, I'm not expecting him to be big masculine man. In that moment, I'm just aware of we're actually doing some like deep inner healing right now, and that's sacred. And there's a deep amount of respect that I have for that. When it hasn't gone so well, it's when there's the child is yielding a big sword and a big shield, right? And it's like, it's just like, it's lashing out because there's these different parts that are defending and protecting the part that actually wants to be seen.
you. I mean,
Yes.
how do you distinguish it goes
Right.
from like my child, my da-da-da, to you're doing, right?
You're doing this. Why are you doing that? It's all, you are responsible for my experience,
Mhm.
right? When we start to get into that territory, it's different than this is what I'm feeling. When you did that, I felt this. I try not to use the term, this made me feel.
Yeah.
You
You
did
made
this
me
and I
feel.
felt.
Yeah.
You did this and I felt.
Yeah.
Like, it's not actually your fault that I feel this way.
Mm.
There's a lot of other options of ways I could feel when you did this exact thing, depending on where I am in my cycle, where I am in my healing, where there's a lot of different places of that. So the distinct part for me is the real awareness on the responsibility for one's experience.
Mm.
And anytime that he has brought something to me from that place, even if it hurts, my practice is to fully receive that as his experience without taking it personally and defending, but actually just being with him in that place.
Yeah. I think that distinction of this is my experience. You said something that triggered it or that, facilitated it, but the experience that I'm having is way bigger than what you just said. And again, we're talking about awareness. We're talking about the capacity to use language in a specific way. We're talking about a lot of things that don't seem like much or don't seem, like you said, sexy to work with, but are so crucial in maintaining a heart connection in conflict.
Totally.
And the consent piece, again, we're just going to keep hitting that. Like, I've literally had partners say, I don't want to ask for consent. I just want to tell you how I feel when and I see this with a lot of men that they fight that. Okay, well, I should just be always available. So the consent piece, we're just going to keep hammering because it's so crucial.
And I feel so in alignment with that, and also just have had a couple different partners where it's been the other direction, where I've asked for you're asking about where have we been held well and where have we not. So I had one relationship where, I would say this could have been gaslighting that was happening, but there was a lot of we would be going from everything's cool to all of a sudden I would say something that out of joy, and all of a sudden it was he would throw a freaking ball of fire at me. It felt like it would go into my solar plexus. It would stun me because it was where did that come from? And then when I would respond of wow, that just caught me off so off. Then he would tell me that I'm not okay with anger.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? I'm actually great with anger, but I'm just when it comes out of nowhere, it feels like I just got punched in the stomach, and then I don't know. Then I have to regather myself, or I feel really paralyzed, and it would put me in freeze. So, back to your consent piece, it's I do think that really goes in both directions, where I would just ask him for consent, and same kind of thing. He'd be like, I shouldn't have to, this is my anger and you should be able to handle anger. You're just not okay with anger. And I'm like, that's so not true. So that was really disorienting for me, because I know myself and I know my capacity, but if I get stunned, if I get sucker punched, if blindsided, slapped back of the head, where I'm just skipping along and all of a sudden it's boom, it's well, how am I supposed to be take a breath and be all of you is welcome here right now. I'm on the ground bleeding right now out of a sucker punch. So I think that these tools, and when you're talking about, just some of the ways of framing things, it may not sound sexy. It may sound super basic, but imago and nonviolent communication, it's these things that just help us have a frame to take responsibility. You had brought up even before, you hurt me. When you said that, I was I hear that, but also there's this sort of I feel hurt. I feel hurt. Because is that totally true? Am I really sure that you hurt me? I feel hurt by what you just did or said. But, it's even that distinction can just make it so much softer to hear,
Yeah.
even in the depth of pain.
Yeah.
And I've seen it over and over, and I've done well with it, and I've done poorly with it, even on my own side of where it's like I've used language that just, if I was to have changed the language just a little bit,
Yeah.
I could have had all the same feelings, but it just could have been received a little bit better.
Yeah.
So that piece of taking responsibility for our experience over and over and over helps so much in the other person not having to do that for us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Otherwise, we do. If your partner or your person can't, it's like we have to just choose, am I willing to do the work for them that they're not doing for themselves, to hold the bullet, to sift through, is this a projection or a reflection?
Yeah.
To interrupt it, be like, how old are you right now?
Mm-hmm.
To be like, we're both slipping into our wounded child right now, and we're fighting from that place. Is my witness consciousness and my healthy adult strong enough that I can lift out of that because they can't, you know? And it's like, you could say, can I be the bigger person? But it's kind of like can I actually grow up?
Right.
Not bigger person because I'm better, but can I actually grow up right now into my healthy adult enough to get out of this thing that is not going anywhere because we're both in our wound?
Yeah, exactly. I think that the other side of this that I see a lot of is this, and again, I want to say we're all dark. Like we all have, I'm sure if I asked you guys, what's the darkest thing you ever said to a guy or what did to a guy, I'm sure it would be, intense. So we all have darkness. The trick, I think, is just starting to piece apart. Most of us don't know, oh, that's my darkness. For lack of a better term, I'm just going to use that term because I really want to keep it like, so the part, gaslighting, for example, like we've probably all been guilty of going like, no, it didn't happen like that. Or no, you're being silly. Or no. Right. So the other way I see all of this play out is in the denial of your experience. Right. And that it's one thing for me to own my experience in front of you and be, adult around that, or at least be aware. But it's another thing, it's another step to be fully validating, I think would be the word to use from Imago, of your experience. And I think that's something else that people tend to just not understand.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like to use Ken Wilber's philosophy, it's tier 2 consciousness. Like there's actually a growing up that has to happen to even be able to hold multiple perspectives at one time.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people aren't yet in that phase, even though they're adults, where they can hold, I'm having an experience of hurt and you are also having an equal experience of hurt, and both, maybe not equal, but both are valid.
Yeah.
Both are actually equally valued, even though I'm in this body and you're in that body.
Yeah.
Like both matter.
Yeah.
And
it's not a threat to my existence that you're having a different experience than me.
Right. Both can be happening, and there isn't one objective truth about our emotional experience, that it's actually a very nuanced, complex system of truths that are happening in any moment. So to really be able to be in the uncertainty and that in-between space of staying curious about someone else's emotional experience, even if I'm having a intense experience.
Yeah.
And there's a really great example of this where my partner demonstrated what I would call really great masculine leadership, if we're using that term, where I was quite activated, like very close to being in the like blind, unconscious rage, driving the car into a tree. I was very close to that place, and he was also, it's like there was heat. Like we were in a hurt dance, not a healing dance.
Yeah.
And he's like, I just want to ask us to take a pause. I don't feel ready to fully have this conversation with you right now. And I'm kind of like, okay, and it's like, yes, thank you. You are right. You are actually correct that this is not going well, and I'm not resourced. You're not resourced. And that kind of holding of like, that's another way to answer your question earlier of how like how a man can really show up is sometimes not actually being the puke bucket for my entire experience. That was actually really important because I got to go sit with myself, and I got to go sit with the parts that in that moment actually wanted to hurt more than they wanted to heal. And that's the truth. And so I got to be with that and feel and like just move that through my body and hold that in my nervous system. We came back and had an incredible, efficient, beautiful healing conversation after that. And so, there's this idea of that being the, standing in the storm sometimes might mean like, I'm actually going to hold this storm and not be a yes for this right now in service of you. And this for me is very third stage. Because it's in service of love. It's in service of our relationship to do that. And I think if whoever is the most aware in the moment has the option. And anyone can call that, either partner. And I don't think that needs to be a masculine or feminine thing, but it's like, I'm going to pause this in service of love.
But so just to nerd out on the masculine feminine thing a little bit, is that he or she who is most aware and most capable of being a witness to what is to truly seeing what is happening is in the masculine. That could be a woman or a man, that could be anybody, right? He or she who is most in the experience of emotion is in the feminine. And sometimes what you described is in this instance, it was your partner, but it could have been you that was most aware. And so that's, because people kind of want to know, like, okay, like how do I tease apart what is the masculine or feminine in those experiences? And in my lexicon, like awareness is the tool of our masculines, right? You talk about, witness consciousness, like the witness conscious is our masculine. Whereas the gift of vulnerability, right, or open-heartedness or tears, right, that would be our feminine. And obviously what we want is some kind of integrated experience of both in those moments. But, sometimes that's tricky to do.
I think that's really a key, though, is that we are human before we are masculine, feminine.
True.
And I feel there's this kind of spot that I know in working with a lot of women that women can get stuck where they're like, oh, but isn't that masculine? If I'm to like hold a boundary with my partner, isn't that masculine? Boundaries are masculine. And I'm just like, oh my God, because it's human first. And even what you're saying, if I have an awareness that something is not healthy right now and I don't bring that, then I'm not actually being accountable to my evolution and to love. And so I think that it's important to realize that both men and women have masculine and feminine polarity inside of us. And a lot of what we're talking about is also, men who haven't touched their inner feminine. And then now we see this like feminization of women, of men, and it can get very mixed up. But that's an interesting road to go down.
No, I mean, I would argue that as whole, to become whole as a human, we have to fully flesh out our capacity, our masculine capacities and our feminine capacities. I see this a lot with men, and a lot of men who are reactive and even in some cases abusive, because they have not shepherded it, I would call, their own inner feminine. Your own inner child is your own inner feminine. Doesn't matter gender. And, so I think it's important. I just like to use those tools because it gives people something to practice. So for example, if I say, I'm going to put you in a pose where you're going to have all kinds of sensation moving through your body, and I'm just going to keep reminding you to be a witness to your own body and sensation, I'm training their masculine to be with sensation. So when I'm using those terms, and I'm saying this for the audience as well, like when I'm using those terms, I'm not talking man and woman, I'm talking about like, how can we access the specific practices that expand our capacity to both express and feel, but also bring awareness and structure. And again, these are human traits, human qualities. And I think sometimes the masculine feminine thing gets so overused and weaponized, but I also like it to pinpoint certain traits.
I think it's really beautiful for that. And I do think that overall it can get so confusing for people because it's like different people will have different teachings or different frames around that, different understandings. So then that word gets used and then people get confused. And so I think like something that's coming to me right now is just around, a lot of shamanic traditions and earth-based traditions work with the medicine wheel, and the medicine wheel, just breaks things up. It's like a compass for life that allows us to look at where we're out of balance and where we're in balance, and where there's, whether we're looking at the 4 elements or the 4 directions or, the seasons, but especially, for instance, with the mental, the physical, the spiritual, and emotional. So I think that there's also a way that the masculine, the feminine, the witness, the inner child, the divine child, the wounded masculine, the healthy feminine, just all of those could also be looked at almost like a compass, like a medicine wheel, where we're able to identify those different archetypal aspects of ourself and then be able to start to look at where are we out of balance. I think what you guys are just talking about around, I've been having a lot more men come to me to work with me because I've worked with women so much that I feel like I've become really, really good at helping the feminine come out of women that had that part of them suppressed, and therefore we're unhealthy. We're literally getting sick, and then seeing that aspect of men where they're really out of balance, and they have rejected their inner feminine. They haven't touched her. They haven't tasted her. They haven't felt their own inner goddess. They didn't even know that was a part of them that they could access. And it's so beautiful, like when a man, for instance, is open to that or starting to recognize that there's a part of him that he's shut down for a cultural reason or a societal reason or a professional reason, or because his, it wasn't okay to cry or whatever that is. When he starts to want to awaken that part, there's such a deep and profound journey in just opening up that aspect of himself on a creative level, on a aliveness level, on a spiritual level. And I offer this kind of from that standpoint of like, continuing to look at these things as a map, not as this is all that we are, not as like an inner division, but more as an opportunity to see where there's more balance to be cultivated inside of ourselves that allows us to be more whole, and then not over-indexing just on masculine and feminine, but also these other dimensions. Because in a way, like masculine and feminine is one plane of polarity, but then it doesn't take into consideration the maturation process and the 100%. Jamie and I like to say we're 100% human and 100% divine. And there's like, oh my gosh, wait, I've just was over-indexing on my humanity so much that I forgot that I can zoom out into the witness. Now, is that masculine or not? I don't know. But like there is some literally directional energy that has me be able to lift out of my very 3-dimensional experience to trust life more. And wow, that is like never going to not be useful to be able to find that. Right?
I mean, I think we just need to say to women, I need to say to women, I say this to a lot of women that I work with, like cultivate and embrace your masculine. Like it's so crucial. And just like you would say to men, like really, find your inner feminine, work with your inner goddess, embrace your inner child, because ultimately we need, wholeness. That's actually, David would talk about the second stage as being the stage of becoming whole human, right? Like having a healthy, cultivated masculine and feminine, so that you can play in the third stage, because you can't play in the third stage if you're not a whole human. And I think that's the misstep that you were talking about earlier, right? That people just think like we just want to get into the juicy shit, I would love to, make this, a little more practical for people. I like to often give people inventories, like, how can you track yourself, right? Given, just to say again, to caveat, like we all have wounds. We all, have varying levels of capacity on how to express those wounds and work with those wounds and heal those wounds. But for people, listening to this, how would you suggest that they inventory themselves or track themselves so that they can start to bring more awareness and hopefully skillfulness to working with their wounds?
Yeah, I'd love to start on this one. Something that was coming up even before is around embodiment and feeling our, like not just feeling our emotions, but feeling the physical cues in our body. Where, especially in Western culture, we go so fast, and we're being bombarded right now by all these temptations to distract our energy. So it's really not helping. So we need to be extra aware right now of slowing down. And I think at a very basic level, but a very missed level, is tracking the physical cues. Usually there's some kind of a cue in our stomach or in our heart, or our breath changes if something is right or not right for us, if something's true or not true. And what I track a lot is that even very functional people are dissociating all the time.
Yeah, very true.
All the time. And it's really easy to override or skip a step or miss yourself if you're not in your body, not present, and you're going too fast. And these things are so basic, but they're so widespread and so common, even in the most like cultivated communities. It's these things I think are very practical. So I'm sure I have more, but I want to let Jamie sprinkle in. But that's something that I feel is really instrumental. Like our bodies are an instrument, and they're giving us cues all the time. But we'll miss them. Ideally we're tracking them when they're subtle and they're not literally turning into like a massive sickness that then requires a whole different level of attention. But I really do believe that a lot of the sickness and the illness that we are experiencing in culture is because there was actually a lot of more subtle cues along the way that if we were able to slow down, pay attention, tend to them, listen, ask questions of our own body, we could have potentially interrupted them getting to that point where there's that thwap and we have to stop.
Yeah. And I think that the idea of training ourselves to feel our own bodies is a very deep, almost endless, lifelong practice that most people just don't track, right? And there's whole modalities coming out now that are so based on just micro attention and micro awareness to your own body. So I love that as a tool. That's a really beautiful tool. Yeah.
I also feel that something that Jess is speaking to, just to highlight, is what I would call embodied alchemy, where I believe that all emotional material and all sensation that happens inside of our body is Shakti. All of it is energy. All of it is chi. All of it is life force that could be potentially available inside of our bodies. And because there's kinks in the hose and parts that are shut down and exhaled and locked away, and then protectors and shells and things in the way, we don't actually get to receive all of the life force that is moving through. And one of my practices that I do and teach, and we teach, is the practice of giving yourself permission to say, all of you is welcome here. All of me is welcome here. And allowing all of the sensation, all of the energy that is moving, and opening into it with like a subtle, gentle, like petals of a flower, like not blasting the door open, but gently opening to feel and experience what is emerging inside, with the perspective that this is my raw materials of my life force. And if I can open to it, then it alchemizes into more life force. But if I try to create, protection or label it, or all the different mechanisms that we have to not fully feel, because the child self doesn't know always that we are a grown adult who's now capable of feeling the thing that we couldn't feel when we were 4 or 10, but now we can. And so there's a reclaiming of that power that we have now through holding the parts that are afraid, but actually allowing the alchemy. Like for me, there's almost an erotic element to opening fully into something that, Joseph Campbell said that, everything felt fully as bliss. Like I feel like everything felt fully is ecstasy. Like there's actually an experience of ecstatically opening in feeling, and that takes steps and practices to get there. But like the first sort of entry level of this kind of alchemy is just simply being able to sit in what you're feeling and allow yourself to feel it fully, as Jess was saying, like the sensations, and allow yourself to just gently drink them in without applying a label or judging them or trying to protect yourself against them, because they are life force.
Yeah. And I think that becomes part of the human practice of being able to first identify and feel. That's kind of how I like to, awareness and sensation, right? That's how I like to think of integration. But to be aware of and then to feel fully by studying body cues and then being able to open into feelings is what I heard you say, right? Such a beautiful practice. And I think that there's probably some cues I would love people to take, to just take note of. A couple of them we've already spoken about. One is the moment that that your partner is the problem, right? You pretty much know you're off track when you start using the you statements versus the I statements, right? If that's happening constantly in your relating, chances are you are missing some of what we're talking about today. Also, if there is a sense of, I think, needing to control. I mean, we've talked about this a little bit as part of my work the last, few weeks, especially, is to really look at like how much control I try to exert over people, right? So that I will feel safe, right? How I will manipulate them. And I think it's actually a byproduct of the patriarchy, right? I mean, if we think about the patriarchy, it's all about control.
Yeah.
And so the way I see this, both in men and women, is how am I going to control you? How am I going to control you? And so I would invite people listening to ask that question and take an inventory of how do I control and manipulate, and what is it for?
Yeah.
What is it for? Usually it's just so that I'll be loved and you won't leave, or I'll feel safe, or, I won't be abandoned. Because these are all, everything we're talking about here is so tender. Everybody's doing their fucking best, right? We're just trying to figure it out. But I think what I loved about this conversation so much is that I think we highlighted some really important ways that people can, examine.
Yeah.
I'll add one to your list there. Another way is sometimes we're having an experience, and when you're in relationship, it brings up obviously the most deepest, most painful, most triggered parts, especially the safer you feel, the more space they have to really come up in intimate relationship. And there's another one of sometimes just actually revealing with ownership what's happening. Actually just revealing, telling on yourself, calling, oh, I feel a part of myself. And I love the term, I feel a part of myself. Or a part of myself feels angry at you. A part of myself feels hurt. A part of myself wants to go into control and manipulation. And just actually
narrating
let that be your expression, instead of dumping it on them, actually sharing the place that you're truly coming from. And that can release so much just tension, because the other person can feel it. And so this practice of just being honest in real time, revealing, is something that, we practice even in deep friendships and when we're creating together, because sometimes things might come up, we practice it with our partners and in relationships of just oh, I feel the part of myself, that feels a little shut down after you just said that. And I'm just sitting in that, that's just where I am right now. And it's oh, it's that's so opening and creates availability, because it's not blaming anyone for anything. It's just simply sharing what is alive and true in this moment.
I think practicing in friendships is really helpful in close friendships. Because sometimes it can start to build a muscle in a little bit of a safer context in certain ways. It can build a muscle. I feel there's ways that Jamie and I and some of our other really, really close friends have been able to cultivate certain aspects of ourselves that weren't as fully online or fully easy through the intimacy and the depth of our friendship. And then those have been applicable then to partnerships, where we've gotten to not only look at the romantic partnership as the dojo, but also our friendships, where it's a little bit easier to also take feedback sometimes there. It's a little bit easier to kind of navigate that stuff. So I also just invite, as a practical application, people to kind of, once you notice a pattern, right? We talk about pattern interrupt, right? Once you're aware, and you talked about awareness before, once you're aware of a pattern, then we start to have the opportunity to interrupt it. So, and that's where, when I was talking about interrupting my own testing before, it's I'm interrupting a pattern. So sometimes what I feel like Jamie and I have even done together and some of our other friends and some of my partners, if I start to notice a pattern, I'm like, okay, if you see me slip into the mode of don't worry about me, I'll be fine.
Mm-hmm.
If you just to name one, that, and I'm not catching it first, you have my full permission to point it out to me in that moment and be like, hey, Jess, you're going into that pattern, that like 6-year-old part of you. It's like, don't worry about me, I'll be fine. And like that can be also really healthy to like in a non-triggered state, recognize the thing, give permission, create like this is going to be our code if that happens.
Right.
And then when the trigger comes up, we can kind of remember, or we get into the pattern and we didn't interrupt it ourselves. We can ask for support with the people closest to us to ally and partner with us on the interruption of that pattern.
Yeah. To me, that's like sort of doing work on the mat before you go into the ring.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because also if you have friends that you trust can have done the work and can self-reflect and can communicate needs and boundaries and feelings, right? Once you have that trust, then your nervous system, because we got to remember, people act out in wounded patterns because there was no demonstration of what a safe and healthy space looked like. So it's not your fault. Right? It's not your fault. It's like we were all given this misinformation. And so I love the idea of practicing either with friends or teachers or workshops or women's groups or men's groups where you really can't. I think that's one of the beauties of men's and women's groups is that it creates a safe space for you to practice those things so that when you're home, it's not totally fucking foreign to you. Yeah.
Also to be called out, we were talking about that call out culture.
Yeah.
But if you know the people are for you, like if you're online and something's happening, that is definitely not a space where you're like, they're really for me and that's why they're calling me out right now. But if you're with your men's group or your women's group or in a safe, a coaching context or something like that, and then you get called out or called up or called forward, which I like a little bit better. But you know that the come from and the orientation is for you, not against you. It's so much easier to receive, even if it's hard and even if it's true and even if it sucks. There's like this, oh God, I know that this is for me. I know you're for me. So I will look at that, and there's an authenticity and a realness that I think can help to rise us up and cultivate there too.
Yeah. And you're also training your nervous system. Like people don't realize you have to train your nervous system to receive feedback.
Yes.
It's a big training, actually.
Yeah. It totally is.
And inside of relationship, one of our deepest, like we will die on the mountain of this agreement is to continue to be more and more truthful and open and honest. In service of intimacy.
Yeah.
And that has been really hard at different points because it means being able to receive feedback and being able to hear it. And I believe that some people don't tell the truth because their partner is actually not open to receiving the truth.
Been
So
my
to your
experience.
point, to actually become available and safe for someone else to share something that might have you feel rejected, abandoned, disappointed, sad, but be able to hear them in that without making them wrong for that being their truth. A lot of people say they want deeper intimacy, but they haven't yet practiced on the mat of being able to receive feedback
Deeper truth,
as like something that ultimately brings clarity to the system, even if momentarily uncomfortable.
Yeah. So, as we're closing this up, I really want to, keep giving, our people at home or wherever they are in their car, wherever, awarenesses and tools and ways to start to recognize how this is playing in your relational life. Because I think most people are just not aware, like, oh, this is my child. Even this is my child. Which part of this is me, right? Even that, most people are just not aware. So, anything else that you guys can think of that would be really beautiful practice for people to start to notice in their day-to-day relationships in life?
I have a practice that I used to do with college students when I was running that organization. I used to really feel like in some ways our body responses and our intuitive impulses are kind of taught and conditioned out of us from a young age, or made wrong, or certainly not cultivated and intended to. Or so a really brief meditation that one can do to start to track their body cues is you can close your eyes and picture a person or a scenario that is a full yes, a situation that is just a full yes, that brings you alive, that feels like unquestioned, undoubtable, and start to notice the embodied cues that you have. Like, notice what's happening in your heart, notice your shoulders, your belly. How does your belly feel? And just like actually take stock of, as you're visualizing that, my breath is slower and more in my stomach. Oh, my heart is beating slower. Oh, my shoulders are away from my ears. Like, there's things that will happen if you go into a visualization like that. And then do one where it's like, now picture a person or a recent experience or something that is showing up for you as with a lot of resistance, a lot of a no energy, just as a clear, like, not good fit, is off for you. And then start to let yourself visualize that and then feel what happens for you in your body. It's like, oh, my heart is racing. Oh, my shoulders just shrugged. I started feeling nauseous. I started feeling pain in my back. Once you start to identify what are the cues that your body naturally gives you when something's a yes or something's a no, then in your life, when it's not that simple and not that clear, you can actually start to pay attention to, like, oh, I just caught myself breathing fast, or I just caught my shoulders up by my ears. Why? What's happening right now that's having that happen? Oh, I just said yes to it. Simple things sometimes. I just said yes to a dinner that I really need rest. And I just felt tension in my stomach, but I would have just made a story up in my mind about why I should do that, because I'll make connections or whatever.
Right.
But if you can actually just get the story out and just find the physical cues and then be tracking that more, you can start to know how your body lets you know what's a yes and what's a no. Or if this person is like, even if coming closer into this argument is a yes or a no, or something starting to give me a warning that I might start to lose my center here.
Yeah. The awareness practice that I love to give is around contempt and judgment, right? And if you can just take a moment and track your relationship field, I'll often ask men to just kind of sit and feel the field of their relationship, whether there's kids involved or, whatever, and to just track for where is their contempt in our field, right? Maybe from her, maybe from me. Where's their judgment? Like, where am I judging her? Where do I feel she's judging me? Right? And just to really kind of to identify the patches, or the geysers of discontent in the relationship. And I think, once I'm aware, like, oh, I'm sensing that there's, you're judging me for something, right? Okay, let's get it out. Let's do a judgment practice. Or why don't you just, I'm ready to hear your judgment, and then I'll let you know how much of it lands. And so just, again, like a spreading your awareness through the field and your sensitivity through the field of your relationship from time to time with an honest and courageous desire for the truth, whatever the truth is, I think is something that I would ask people to try. Write it down. Have a and then you have fodder for a conversation that needs to happen.
Yeah, I love that. And another practice related to that is that kind of an internal version of that is, noticing where there's judgment, contempt, anger, grief in your relational field, and then doing even a small, short meditative practice where you just go inside and see which part of you feels that. To just have a deeper awareness of where is that coming from, understanding that we're of many minds, and that may not be your integrated higher self who's having that experience.
Yes.
And it may not actually be about your partner as much as you think it is when you go in and you see which part of you is needing love. And I call this practice noticing and approval, because you just go inside and you just notice who's speaking right now, who has something to say, who's raising their hand, who's throwing a tantrum, who's, like throwing things out the window, who's disassociating. You go in and you actually bring attention to your inner world with just a relaxed noticing and approving, like bringing compassion and approval and love to any part that you see, and simply noticing without the analysis. And this takes a little training for a lot of people to be able to do, because we want to notice something and then immediately start analyzing what it is in our mind. And it's actually trying to fix it or trying to make it go away. And it's actually just simply being with, asking questions, listening, bringing love, like just noticing what is present without creating a story about it. And I feel that if you do that before actually going into a judgment practice with your partner, that it will be much more effective, because your judgments can come out as like, I notice there's a part of me that feels like you may have this experience and this is how I feel about that, you know, and I think there's ways that we can do the inner
I'm
work.
making up is a huge, I'm making up this about you. I'm
My
making up you feel
interpretation.
this.
I love like my interpretation of
the way this
was,
occurs to me is, I mean, there's all sorts of really great ways, but I love that filter. That's a beautiful filter of like, okay, feel the field of your relationship, notice what parts of you are getting activated and, you know, and where they're coming from, and maybe giving some compassion to yourself. And then if there needs to be a conversation, you can have that conversation.
It's also so much easier to receive if someone is naming that it's a part of them and not all of them that's feeling this about you.
Or that it's like the truth.
Some other part is actually holding your inness while this part is feeling, you know, that's like a lot easier to receive than all of me has decided this thing about you.
Decided. It's been bestowed upon me by the gods. The truth about you, asshole.
It is
true. Spirit told me that
you know, we have a Tantra teacher, Sarita Ananda, who is in Bali, who also, she studied with Osho for 28 years. And she has a practice where she says, you know, if there's something that has charge, if you're triggered by somebody, see when you can remember, how far back you can remember that same charge going. And can you go back to like 5 years old, you know, just to check in with how much of that is actually just activating something that's very young. Because sometimes somebody can just do something that's fucked up and you're like, that was fucked up, but you're not like super charged about it, you know? You're just like, that was fucked up. And they're like, yeah, I'm sorry, that was fucked up. And then you're just like, okay, we can
let's
move.
go. Let's move.
Yeah. But then, you know, so sometimes if there's a lot of extra pain or charge or energy around it, it's an opportunity to look into, and this is like parsing out what we said in the beginning around the proportionality of what is of this is here and what is this from my mom, my dad, this thing.
Right. If it, you know, the general rule of thumb is if it's urgent, it's trauma. Right. If it, I mean, you know, with the exception of abuse or getting, you know, something really gnarly, if I need to talk to you about something, then chances are it's not the current moment thing. It's obviously something deeper. Right. Okay. So last thing I'll ask is like, give me one of your parts that like shows up, you know, like comes to the party uninvited. You know, like what, like for me, I have a teenager. God, I can see him. I actually did a bunch of work on this. He's like 12, 13. He's got big, long hair, rides a skateboard, is just pissed that it's not fair. Right. So whenever the part of me like that comes online, this like, it's not fair. This isn't fair. This isn't fair. I know it's him. And that fucker is just like you know, he's ready to beat people with his skateboard. I'm curious what you've got. Give me a good juicy part.
There's a few of them in there. Let's see. I have one that this is like a deep, young, kind of exiled part that's like always alone, doesn't trust other people, trusts God, but doesn't trust other people. And it's a very young version of myself that learned that like I'm trustable, God's trustable, but like people, no way. And she's kind of alone in her room and, you know, she's in timeout and she's always too much. It's like there's that. And then in front of that, there's this like kind of badass, like, you're never going to touch her, protect her part.
Right.
And so there's all these different ones that like constellate around it. And it's like this cluster that's all protecting this one that really just doesn't trust people.
Oh, that would be such a fun little workshop. Like to like, let's identify let's embody and identify the cluster of our parts and then play together.
Totally.
I'm sure
that
gets done. I'm sure that gets done.
I did a Halloween party once called Unseen and everybody had to dress up as an amplified version of the unseen part of themselves that they wanted to act as for the whole night. And it was like everybody had a costume around it.
Yeah.
You got to like kind of make light of it, but also be it for the night. There's two that come up right away for me. One is it's like a 5-year-old part that is basically like, you guys do what you need to do. I'll take care of myself. Like who got really, and it happened with the divorce of my parents. It's like, do what you need to do that's right for you. I'll take care of myself kind of, but it's like shut down independence.
Yeah.
And then the other one is this like almost like defensive injustice. I'm not seen. You don't see me for all the things I'm doing behind the scenes to make your life better, that gets like, feels really like kind of the unfairness and a little bit of the injustice of like, you don't even know like how much I am showing up for this, or you know, that it's very hard when that one gets activated to hear the other person's experience when I'm like, what the fuck? You want to break that? You don't even know.
I'm seeing a skit. I'm seeing a skit of all of us saying our words.
I just think whatever can bring levity and awareness to people. And so, you know, I mean, as we close this conversation, and thank you guys, it's been really juicy, beautiful conversation. Thank you. I just, you know, also want to let people know to hold these things lightly and kindly and playfully, because even though we're talking about how important this work is, it's very, you know, our defense mechanisms came up for a reason. You know, we were very smart to create certain strategies as children. And I think the message of this podcast is like, it's okay to start to let those things go and recognize where that part of you is either helping your relationship blossom or dragging it to the bottom of the ocean. You know, any final thoughts you guys want to give to people as they're examining their wounds and how to work with them?
I have one, and you know, this has been said in many ways, but I think it's important as a bookend of this conversation, and that is that inside of each of these parts that we might think are negative or are a problem or we want to fix or we want to make go away, is ultimately a lot of our power, our essence, our truth. Like they all have gifts and value, and they're likely just stuck in time and are ready to be felt and then reassigned.
Yeah.
And I've had this experience of different parts of myself being really good somewhere else when I've like put her to work in this other place, like the one that like consistently worries, like let's have her take care of the one that feels like she's never getting enough needs met, right? And when they can find that relationship inside, it actually becomes of service. Like there's a service and there's a gift that is inside of each of these parts of us.
Yeah. I think that's sort of the tenet of shadow work in general, is that each shadow has a gift, right? It's just about integration and then allyship, right? Any final words for?
I mean, you know, I like to say that I hold the altar of the sacred and the profane. And so I have a part of me that just is like, may we remember to not take everything so seriously all the time, that there actually can be a way that this can be a little bit of a game. Like it can be a little bit of a game to examine. We can get very navel-gazing, self-obsessed. And I think there's a way that this can be a game of like, how can I live the juiciest life? How can I feel my aliveness? How can I not judge my shadow or my pain, and like really just look at it as me stretching and extending? And how can I, even in the moments of like real hurt or pain, is there a way that I can just even take a moment to like make light or make a joke of my own experience, and then I can go back into dealing with it. But I think there's a difference between bypassing and actually just being like able to expand for a moment and be like, hallelujah, I'm alive. Okay, let me get back in my shit. You know, like so play, a little bit of play.
Play is beautiful. Play is beautiful. And I think this has been said a couple times, but I think my final thought on this would be, there is so much life force. I think you spoke to it. There's so much life force underneath these patterns and wounds, right? The actual patterns and wounds create closures in our body, like you were talking about body awareness, and that going into them is not just for our partner, right? That it really, you know, when we own truth and we can identify how these things collapse our body, we bring online so much life force. And I think so many people are so exhausted And part of the reason why they're exhausted is because it takes a lot of fucking energy to repress all these feelings, to keep repressing these patterns. And so the more that you can go into this, my hope would be the more life force that you'll be able to recapture. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. All right. Thank you both for being here. And please tell us where we can find you. I mean, I'll put stuff in the show notes, but if you just want to give a pitch for where people can find you, that would be lovely.
Well, my website is jessmagic.com. And then I just started a spiritual foundation that's a church of aliveness, basically, called the Mawali Foundation that Jamie's also a part of. And so we should have that website up at the MawaliFoundation.com
Yeah, please do.
soon.
And when you do, we'll make sure to put it into the show notes so people can access it. Anything that you want to?
Yes, I share a lot on Instagram at _awakened_woman. And I also own awakenedwoman.life, which is a company that I founded that is a community and a curriculum for women to reclaim their sensual aliveness, their power, and have amazing relationships. So that
Beautiful.
is also available. And I share a lot of free stuff on Instagram. So I would say that's...
Yeah, I really want to encourage anybody who got something out of this to find Jess and Jamie. I've worked with them personally. I trust them implicitly. And so it's been a real pleasure to have you guys here.
Thank you so much.